Morning, everybody. Professor Chatterjee, Professor Nilanjan, Amit, and many of you gathered here. It's indeed an honor, and I'm delighted to be here this morning. A few weeks ago, when Amit called me and said, I have to be here as your keynote speaker, I was wondering if he had actually done a mistake in calling me. Usually, bankers don't get called into sessions where there are a bunch of high-profile academics. So I'm still scratching my head to figure out what am I going to say. And after hearing Professor Chatterjee, I think I will re-script what I came prepared for. In fact, Amit's speech and Dr. Professor Chatterjee's speeches make me wonder. I came with A, and as always in life, you need a plan B. So I'm going to try and invoke my plan B this morning and try and tell you stuff. Because you said I'm going to talk about the macro space and then what are MBA's outcomes for good MBA outcomes. I actually had something else in mind, but let me try and fuse the few thoughts together. Most of my sessions, when I try to sort of address people, are often in the financial services space, colleagues from the industry, at best corporates, or students. When I'm going to sort of address people who are at the peak of their profession in academics, I wonder whether I can add value, but I'll try and give you the practitioner's view of what happens, and maybe that will sort of help you answer that question that Amit has thrown at everybody, the measuring outcomes of MBAs. As a practice every year, or not every year, actually now every week, whenever a new candidate joins the bank, and this year, as in this calendar year, we've hired close to maybe like 900 people, or maybe 1,000. And we usually hire them in bunches of 40, 50. And I make sure that I address every candidate who joins the bank. So that means I've addressed about 20, 25 sessions this year. These are not long, about maybe half an hour, 45 minutes. Invariably, it's about 10 minutes of my opening remarks, and I invite a lot of questions and answers, because I think that's where the real flavor of the people joining us, and hopefully I can communicate what I'm we are trying to make of the bank. And as a practice nowadays, if we are hiring about 1,000 people a year, at least 300 of them are from some MBA school. Right? So the 4 lakh candidates, Amit, you spoke about, a fair amount of them find their way into our bank. And having gone to a premium management school in my days, I do have a mental framework of what I expect to see here from these candidates. And sometimes they sort of thrill me. Sometimes I must admit they disappoint me. Not because they're not clever or otherwise, but I think the world view or the view they come into work is partially, I think, what Professor Chatterjee said. It's almost like the entry ticket or an entry gate pass to either this job takes them to that glory, or where can I get the next job. I'm not faulting them for that, but I think perspective is probably a touch lost. So in all sessions that I try to crowdsource thoughts around what can I communicate. And no different even for this address. This is where I'll try to fuse what I had prepared and what I will talk to you about. I'd asked a couple of my colleagues to literally crowdsource some thoughts around what are the questions that today's youngsters are asking. This, as you can see, is probably most of you will relate to it, data-driven strategies. And these questions and these compelling questions are not from some thought leaders in the industry or some very erudite. These are youngsters, as you would see, people in their teens and early 20s, and which is really the audience. Either are going to be students or people you are going to sort of groom the raw material that you will produce finished goods of, or these are people who have already completed their first level of education, maybe an MBA from some school, and have these questions at the top of their mind. So having looked at it through these, and these are what I call the, literally our betas, the youngsters of today. And I also think about this as my theme for what I wanted to speak to you about. These young betas are now the beta generation. And what will you all do, or what will we do as mentors to make them the omegas? So really, the few minutes that I will share with you are really about the thought on how do our betas, who are the betas of today, become tomorrow's omegas? And is the management education program of today really creating those omegas? And we will talk about what I have in mind as my experience and my thoughts. So let me just talk about the beta. I have this crazy habit of trying to create acronyms of everything. So when I go through any of these articles, I try to find somewhere to patch up words. And beta to me is about B for blurred boundaries, E for evolving mindsets, T for tech natives, and A for raised on activism. So we will talk a little about each of them and see if there's something that you will relate to each of them. This is the danger of technology. It's already clipped past to the slide that I did not want to be on screen, but that's part of... Okay, I'll pause here. So the beta generation that we are talking of, these youngsters who are probably always on, switched on, have very little from one to the other. Their life and work and personal life, professional life, all begin to sort of blur. And they have evolving need for continuously learning something and experiencing some stuff which is probably not quenched by conventional ways of giving them that input. Naturally, they are tech natives or digital natives as we call them. And society is playing a part in terms of influencing them to be activistic about some cause. Now put this in the context of all that's going around us. We keep hearing, we keep reading, hearing, experiencing India going through, probably it's, in my words, some purple patch, right? As the rest of the world is in a funk. We've seen this play out over the last, I think COVID in some sense, though it hurt health-wise, India came out a lot better than many other Western economies. And we're seeing it. And, 2 days after the monetary policy, normally I would have been asked to talk about what is the governor saying of the monetary policy. So I'll try and draw some thoughts around that. A conservative organization like the regulators are talking about India will still grow at close to 7%. This at a time when most of the world is talking about degrowth. An organization like the RBI is sort of reinforcing the fact that yes, inflation may be tapering down, or probably you're seeing it's almost the worst part of this season of inflation is probably behind us. Now, this is indicative of the fact that A, we've done something right, but more importantly, the world we are stepping into between 23 and beyond looks quite promising. It looks promising because of what Morgan Stanley famously calls the 4Ds, right? How the demographics are working for us, the decarbonization, the digitalization, and of course the denationalization or bringing back onshoring, so to say, to India. So these themes, if you will, are all getting fused with a massive and a very massive change that is happening in the Indian ecosystem, particularly around how finance and payments and technology is getting integrated. As normal citizens who probably don't spend too much time thinking about banking, I would argue any of you here would probably use your device to do the 79th organ. I call that the 79th organ, right? All of us have 78 organs. This phone has become our 79th organ to do almost everything. I don't know how many of you went into a branch of a bank to conduct business in the recent past. So in a world where technology has brought everything so close to you at a time you want and only get better and more convenient, many of our choices that young students will make in this sort of evolving ecosystem, which is what I've talked about, these blurring boundaries, is fundamentally redefining how things are happening. In this context, if you think about how are we going to create young students who are going to make a difference and who are going to both benefit by all the changes, but even more importantly, given those questions that popped up from the minds of these youngsters, what is education doing or how is education influencing them to shape the things that they want to do infinitely better. Now, let me go back to the opening remarks I made when I speak to our younger colleagues. I asked them about, why did they join a bank when they've done an MBA? I asked them about what are you looking to get in your sort of work life? What do you, other than the typical, we want to become the MD next and we want to make a lot of money, there are some subtexts, there are some themes that emerge from all these conversations. One, there is certainly a natural curiosity, particularly I think the course content that most MBAs come from, despite I think the lot of efforts that the institutions do to give them practical experience, somewhere I believe that is not making them a day one ready for the job. In fact, we about 5 years back, tied up with a couple of management institutes we take students after some filtering, after their BCom, BA, whatever their preliminary graduation, and put them through an integrated MBA program. So it's our own equivalent of our own management program or the equivalent of our administrative services program. So they go through both class and campus alternately. We are finding that their ability to integrate better with our system, and this I'm not saying a few, this is probably 10% of our workforce is this category of employees. So it's not a small number, over 1,000 people. They are turning out to be way more productive for themselves, productive for the organization. They seem to be enjoying their job way better, and even more importantly, turning out to be a lot more influencers and career progression for them seems to be way better. So a thought I would leave for you is the MBA program that, and I have to quickly confess that my knowledge of how you conduct your programs is only peripheral, so if you already do it, allow me the luxury of saying I was wrong. But the practice of trying to bring young students right out of their graduation, do some pre-filtering, bring them to an integrated program, fuse the two, run it for a year, 18 months, we are finding that enormously valuable. And again, bring back this whole thing about this beta that I spoke about, this beta generation, the typical 20s, 25, this highly restless, always switched on, naturally digitally friendly community. I find their absorption and their enthusiasm to participate and work in this kind of an environment is both helping them and helping us. Now, I did begin by saying, from beta to omega, which really was what I wanted to talk about, in a few thoughts around what I meant by creating omegas. We all know, right? The omega is probably a symbol of what I would say perfection, excellence, and a deeply entrenched in credibility. So to my mind, if the outcome of any program, whatever it be, and take away from what like Professor Chatterjee said, keep the money aside, you want people who are focused on social good, who are the best measure of them is not return on income, is are they making the other ROI, which is reliant on India. If our MBA programs can produce students who are relying on India and can make reliant on India, then probably your globalizing Indian thought, Professor, is something that can sort of fuse nicely into this. But let me just turn to this thought about the omega, and let's assuming it works. Yes, it does. A few thoughts around this is I keep talking about opportunities are all around. Nobody is served any differently. If you've joined an MBA program, whether you come from a very elitist background or you've just come from unprivileged, humble background, the course program provides you the same set of opportunities. And like it is for anything else in life, the start point is almost, once you get into a program, is more or less alike. But how do you optimize those opportunities? How do you Because I sometimes believe opportunities come sort of dressed in work clothes. You miss it, right? You think it's work overalls and you miss it. But invariably, those who are guided to pick that better or can get better insights on how do you leverage that opportunity tend to be more successful. No better example than our own, the Dhirubhai Ambani, who was doing extremely well in Turkey, got promoted ahead of time, but decided that being an entrepreneur is probably going to be, his calling, and he came back to India, and the rest is history. So I think optimizing opportunities, ability to look at how do you leverage those opportunities, and and how do you, the omegas that you seek to create are going to be infused with that thought process is a thought I would leave you. Recently, we did this employee stock option program, and a new regulatory requirement requires us to cost the stock options, and the institution that grants the stocks needs to carry the cost of that grant. So the most famous model for you guys are teachers, so you know better than me, is the Black-Scholes model. So curious about Black-Scholes, I did some reading and I figured that if you didn't know, Scholes was a Nobel laureate. But curiously, as a Nobel laureate, he was also a hedge fund manager in the late 90s or early 90s. And as hedge fund managers, it's not surprising that hedge fund managers lose money, because that's where they make and lose. But to have a Nobel laureate who was most celebrated, he and his partner, I don't remember his name, Metron or somebody, they both had started a hedge fund called Long-Term Capital Management, celebrated Toast of New York for about 4 or 5 years. And they bet on things that now in hindsight look like bad ideas, but they had no guide, no perception of risk. And mindless of risk, the calls were taken and they actually claimed for bankruptcy. This is from a Nobel laureate. So I think the other thought that as much as we pursue opportunities, how do we make sure that we manage risk better, right? So the managing risk potholes is as important in the pursuit of excellence, in the pursuit of becoming the omega, is about ensuring that you're not sort of blindsided, right? Managing risk is as important as you sort of optimize on the opportunities. I would then look at the other theme is about excellence. As I say, the race for excellence, there's no finish line, right? In all these journeys, it's not about one silver bullet. It's about many, 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 many marginal gains. Almost the atomic habits, 1% improvement continuously. And while we can look at many examples since it's football season, all of us have our own icons and we sort of follow. And there are going to be any number of examples of people who have chosen to be who have practiced or who have fine-tuned the art of improving almost daily, right? Many years ago, I had the opportunity to look at Capital One. If you all know, Capital One is a large US credit card provider. And I met Nigel Morris, who's the founder. This was an era when India was just beginning to get into this credit card space, and it was the sort of talk of town. And Nigel Morris had built Capital One so brilliantly in an extremely competitive world, which Mr. Nilanjan will probably have a lot more idea about it. And the funda he taught me then, and I had this privilege of having to catch up with them, is don't try to be exceptional in one part and think that you're going to crack the code. 10% improvement in every line of that business, continuously all the time, the multiplier effect of that is immeasurable, right? And his pursuit, and even today, in a highly competed space, businesses that have constantly delivered have been ones that have pursued excellence and continuous improvement almost unfailingly. And I would argue that's the multiplier effect that we should be pursuing and we should look at. I turn to governance. Often we all get excited by business opportunities, and they keep saying that innovation happens at the periphery of regulation, which is not entirely wrong, but never at the cost of good governance. Right? And I often say that in governance, it's not how you balance out the time in business versus the time on the business. Particularly as you go up the leadership chain, the ability to take two steps back and look at how the governance mechanisms work, how you can ensure that indeed the capability of an institution is built to last, and the trade-off between doing the right thing and doing the thing right. That balancing out is a constant challenge. And if I look at our own environment, I think RBI scores heavily on that. When one could argue that the regulators have been conservative at some point in time, have been very tough. But I think if today India is being praised universally, if India is crossed over some of the toughest periods, is because of the constant vigil and the ability to balance out and ensure that never have they taken the eyes of the governance. In fact, as a leader of a bank for a fair number of years, I've seen my own journey. The time spent on matters governance have increased manifold. And I'm not complaining, because I think it keeps the fact that I can stand in front of an audience and talk about an institution suggests that hopefully we haven't done something wrong, otherwise I would have been booted out. Governance is at a premium. So, being governance hawks, and young officers, young MBAs don't probably give too much importance, but I think in the pursuit of excellence, we must guide them to think about that. And the last is about being authentically authentic. That's a hard, sort of a tough alliteration, but I think authenticity is everything. I heard Professor also talk about authenticity as absolutely crucial. No better example than salt, right? You mix it, you dry it, it's back again as salt. So nothing more authentic than salt is. And salt was a matter of commodity, how soldiers were paid many, many years ago, because it retained its original form all the time. So if you piece all these together, no surprise, it all comes to omega, which is what I was looking to build. So from beta to beta to omega is what I was guiding. A trivia for all of you. Omega is Omega watches, the Omega 2 billion watch. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, tourbillon, I think it's whatever it is called. It's after 500 hours of work to make a watch. And the maker of the watch gets to engrave his name on the rear of the dial. And that stays forever. I think you are all the watchmakers, and you are the ones who are building the watchmakers, and you are building the omegas. So with that, I bring it to close. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a wonderful conference. Remember, beta to omega. Thank you very much.